Please enter the conference number followed by the pound key, or press star to create a new conference.
This is USU here in Logan for the NSF team meeting. Can we get the sites to check in, please? Thank you.
Salt Lake's here.
Thank you, Salt Lake.
Humboldt is here.
Thank you.
Okay. And then push it from off, and you don't have to actually like lean towards it or anything. It's a really sensitive mic, so you can stay sitting straight up and turn it on. And then when you're not talking, just shut it off, or everyone will hear you. So I'd tap it one more time. To turn it off? Yeah. Okay.
I don't even know your title, Bob. Water manager? Everyone calls you the water czar. And Lorian said, is that with a T or a C? I said, I don't know. CZ. Bob Fotheringham works for Cache County and as a water manager. And Bracken Henderson is with the Soil and Water Conservation Districts and is not in the room at the moment, but I presume he'll be back. I hope that got picked up by the microphones. In any case, I have asked both of them to come and talk, certainly to participate in all of what we've done so far, and they've been faithful users of our parking tokens and trekking up to our turf to talk. But from the very get-go, it has been part of my vision of our work that we do our best to try to ground ourselves in the realities of water management and water resources as they're experienced by the water user community, the water management community, people outside of the research community. It is maybe trite, but important to always remember that it's a really hard thing to bridge between those needs and demands and day-to-day struggles and the science community, the research questions, the imperatives we face in our careers. And it is not very often that research is done specifically and effectively in a way that is directly applicable, surprisingly enough. A lot of our work is applicable in different kinds of ways, but requires a lot of translation. And so I think it will behoove us to, as we shift gears into really writing a project, do everything we can to keep the conversation as inclusive as possible with those both within our disparate ranks on campus, but people off campus as well, with whom we want to partner and make sure at the back end of whatever projects we might get funded are able to help shape and utilize the information that comes out. So with that as introduction, I'll hand over the microphone. Put that on your tie if you want. Okay.
I thought there was a like a dry erase marker up here, but I don't see it now. Yeah, I thought it was just right here, but anyway, Doug Jackson Smith, when I talked to him about what I should present today, he said, well, why don't you just tell us how we've done so far and kind of rate our research, right? And so, you know, if you're to rate your research, I think all of your research is right here.
Is that a good thing?
Yeah, it's right on top. It's the best there is. And it really is. It's good stuff. It's just that, you know, how do you prioritize when you start to get the dollars, you know, and which research you're going to use the most in whatever proposal you have? How do they rank, you know, in order of priority? Because everybody's right on top. And when you're trying to manage water, and you're trying to manage water for canal companies and municipalities and the environment and the Bear River Refuge and everybody else, their needs are right on top, okay? And I look at your research the same. It's very good research in the fields that you're researching. But then when you're starting to put this project together, you know, does it all rank the same? You know, what's the most important? And as I came online, the most important thing for Cache County was to protect water that we call Bear River Project water. Okay, Bear River Project water is, and I'll get into it, the 60,000 acre feet that Cache County has available from additional development on the Bear River. And so that ranks real high in the priority of where I invest my time. And so the first thing that I looked at when I came to Cache County was a water bank.
Could you, what do you mean by the word protect?
Well, when I say protect, I guess it's secure, preserve, and protect is what I'm talking about. Because there are water rights in the valley, and there are 1860 priorities, and we need to help people understand what those water rights really mean, what the beneficial uses are, how much water they really can divert, those kinds of things. Preserving is this water banking issue, and the protecting is that the Wasatch Front has, I mean, one way to put it, is that they have a lot more votes than Cache County when you get into the Senate, when you get into all of this. And so right now they've put area of origin, I'll get into that, into water law when it comes to Bear River Development Act, but it's just like the Colorado River. Eventually the votes will sway what happens to the water. And so the idea is that Cache County needs to know what its right is, and we need to make sure that we secure, preserve, and protect it. And so if there is going to be development occur, we don't want Salt Lake to develop outside the bounds of the law, okay? And so that's what I mean by protection. If that's, I can go into it more if you want, but really we want to make sure that the 60,000 acre feet that Cache County was allotted in that act can be used in Cache County. The management part of it is what you're going to use it for.
That's great. I mean, the question is not to debate public policy, thanks for clarifying.
Okay. Anyway, when I came online, there was this Western Governors Association meeting, and you can read that, but basically what they're saying is, hey, states, water is going to be a problem in the future, and you need to do what you can to help support watershed groups to deal with the issues that are going to be facing them. And so this is one of the things that I've taken to legislative groups, et cetera, to try and help them understand how much we need a bank in the state of Utah. Most other western states and midwestern states have banking laws. When I first came on board, I talked with the county council. They liked the idea. They created a quote-unquote ordinance to establish a water bank. When it went to the attorney's office, they said, you know, the state hasn't sanctioned that. We need sanctioning within the state of Utah to allow us to bank. And so I've been working on that since 2008 to try and get those sanctions to allow banking in the state of Utah. This is a little bit of history of development on the Bear River. The early claims are 1860 priorities, and most of the rights on all the tributaries to the Bear are that. Actual rights on the Bear River about 1889, and that's when power development came in, 1904 to 1927. Sure. They created irrigation contracts for water out of Bear Lake. In July of 1920, you have the Dietrich Decree in Idaho. It's a federal decree to distribute the waters between the two states and to distribute them in Idaho. You have the Kimball Decree in Utah that distributes water on the Bear River and its tributaries in Utah. Matches a lot of the language in the Dietrich Decree. In 58, you have the compact and the amended Bear River Compact. In 89, you have subsequent storage contracts because the state of Utah was saying we weren't getting our fair share of the natural flow. And we were in discussions with Bob Morgan and Keith Higginson at the time to try and figure out how we'd operate the river. In 1995, you have the Bear Lake Settlement Agreement. And in 1999, you have the Cache Valley Groundwater Management Plan. Now, whatever you do, I guess this one thing I would point out here, whatever you do with this National Science Foundation project, if you don't make this list, it won't make much difference. I don't know if that makes sense to you or not, but this in its entirety is kind of the law of the river. There are probably some things I've left off, but if you can't get your project to become law and get it on this list, then it probably won't do much to change anything. Hopefully that makes sense to you. The Dietrich Decree, which is important on this river, says that Utah Power and Light has a pretty much unlimited water right. They can do whatever they want with the water they store in Bear Lake. The next one says, a water commissioner or water official charged with the administration of the decree shall see that there is delivered at the Utah state line such quantity of water as is necessary to go together with the natural increment below said Utah state line to satisfy said water rights in accordance with their dignity and priority. And really the water right that you have in Utah is the right as it leaves Cache County, okay, at Bear River Canal Company. And so Idaho has to send across the state line what is required to meet whatever water rights are on the river, but the primary one's here. And that's all. And so when you set up the distribution between the two states, X plus Y, whatever is coming in Cache County equals Z, okay? And so if you have irrigation in Cache County that's taken out of production, and you have Y plus A, then Idaho has to send across Y minus A, okay? And so a bank in Utah is important not only to Cache County, but to the Wasatch Front and everybody else in Utah. Because if we take land out of production and we don't keep its right and its dignity and priority, then water right then lapses back across the state line, okay?
Then the amount that Idaho has to give to the state border does change or it doesn't?
The amount of water that Idaho has to send across the state line has to do with, this is the natural flow. It has a storage component also, okay? And so Idaho, they rewrote those contracts on that prior slide so that everybody that diverts out in Idaho can take out of Bear Lake storage water, okay? Whatever right they have according to the Bear Lake settlement agreement and whatever the lake elevation is that year. So they get an allocation each and every year. And so, yeah, it changes every year, okay? Each year it will change based on natural flow and stored water available.
And that takeout point Z, that's downstream from Cutler Dam.
That is Cutler Dam. Oh,
The quantification point is
Cutler Dam.
the releases from Cutler Dam.
The releases for irrigation, Cutler Reservoir, used to be Wheelon Dam. Okay? So in other words, Idaho has to send them across the state line to meet the water rights in Utah and their dignity and priority, and their 1889 priority. So they send it across. If we take land out of production in Utah and don't use it, you know, whether we want to or not, say we want to put some water in stream flow, whatever, if it goes downstream and is not used and makes it to Cutler Reservoir and goes out those canals, then there's less call on the river from up above.
And so the quantification at Cutler for purposes of this compact is only what's going into the canals, not what's going into the channel of Bear River itself. What comes out of Cutler Dam is immediately going into canals or is going into the river.
It is going in the summertime, it is operated to always go in the canals. They do produce power sometimes if they have some kind of surge they weren't planning on, a storm or something. But bottom line is Utah Power Line does not want to release any water through the dam for power generation in the summertime when irrigation contracts are on.
Or to speak for the fish, not one drop of water, any drop of water used by a fish downstream from the dam is not counted as part of this. That's just wasted water. That's not part of this accounting system.
It's not wasted water.
But it's not part of that.
Because it does go on downstream to meet demands on downstream and at the bird refuge. Okay.
But
But
it's not part of this compact agreement.
But yeah, there's nothing in the agreement for the environment.
Right.
That's quick.
Yep.
Okay. When it comes to this water management. Okay. Again, you use this water according to state law, and I've underlined that. And again, in Utah, up until 2009, there was no sanctioning for banks in the state of Utah. This is how much water is still available under the Bear River Compact. There's still 125,000 acre feet that first goes to Idaho, 275,000 that goes to Utah, 75,000 split to Idaho and Utah, and then a 30-70 split, okay? This is lower division water. The Bear River is divided into 3 divisions. There's the upper, central, and lower division, okay? So this is the allocation available in the lower division. And the 220,000 acre feet that's part of the Bear River Development Act is part of the 275,000 of Utah's allocation, okay? When the 2 states decided to agree that the water wasn't being distributed very correctly because there were shortages of 40,000 acre feet because Idaho had its own accounting model and Utah had its accounting model. They got together and came up with one uniform system. We don't account exactly, but they're pretty close accountings now. But in that process, the commission approved some banking procedures. In the state of Utah, because we didn't have a bank, we did the best we could to bank water. We basically said if something was used prior to 76, and that's the date using the compact, it was used prior to 76, and then it went out of production after 76, the state could go ahead and reappropriate that without having it come out of depletions. But Idaho had a banking law, so they said, or the water may be banked, because they don't want to lose any water right in its dignity and priority, okay? And then your banking process has to be approved by the commission again. Utah did not have the ability to bank back then, and so pretty hard to do for the state of Utah. So kind of went to the legislative task force and to everyone else that I could that had interest in the Bear River and said, we need a bank. You know, Cache County has a lot of good priority water, and Cache County ought to be able to decide what they want to do with the water. Okay, the purpose of the management plan that we have in Cache Valley and the distribution on the river is to make sure that the water, the amount of depletion in Cache County stays the same. The state engineer determined there is no really significant drawdowns in Cache Valley. In fact, he said there's an additional 25,000 acre feet of groundwater that could be used without causing any impact to any prior user or really change how the drainage system works in the valley. We have an estimated loss of about 800 acres per year in Cache County. 63% of that is irrigated land, 37 is not. And then the Bear Lake water deliveries and what I've explained kind of enter into that. This is a quick view of what Cache County's groundwater management plan is. The first two items of the plan are the most important. You can have a single family domestic in the valley. You don't have to have, except for the stakeholder that was really concerned about this, Utah Power and Light said you can have that single family domestic as long as it's on an existing parcel. As soon as you divide a parcel, you have to go out and find water to file a change on for that use. And the second requirement is that anything greater than that requires mitigation water of some kind in the short statement there. And this is the management plan. I don't know that I'll go into it in great detail, but important to this group, I think, is that this is the mass balance of water coming into and out of Cache Valley or into the groundwater system in Cache Valley. There's about 223,000 acre feet of recharge and 223 acre feet of discharge. Right now, I don't have a pointer, but withdrawals from wells in Cache Valley is about 28,000 acre feet. One thing that I've studied in this last year is I had Utah Geological Survey do, because we've had a lot of people question about whether or not you could recharge and recover groundwater, had them look at that. And they basically said the only way you can really effectively recharge in Cache Valley, except for in two locations that you may be, they're not sure that you can, is by recharging into wells. But I asked them in that process if they could tell me how much of the work Bjorklund and McGreevy did a study a long time ago in the 70s and said there's a large pool of groundwater underneath this. And so the question is, how much of that groundwater could you withdraw? I think this would be another important question to answer, is that there is a huge resource of groundwater, and it can act like a surface water reservoir, only underground and not lose to evaporation, all those kinds of things. How much of that groundwater pool can you actually use? If you were to withdraw 71,000 acre feet and had a way to recharge it back in, would you have subsidence? Would you have consolidation of the aquifer? What would happen? Some of those questions need to be answered. And anyway.
You have a sense of your ET number, the amount of that number that's ET off of farm fields versus evaporation off of Cutler Reservoir? Do you have a sense about, is ag ET 90% of the number or 50% of the number?
I think you'd have to look at I guess, the geography of the valley. I don't have
Okay,
information there.
okay, so it's not known, okay.
Yeah, I don't have, I
Okay,
wouldn't have that
thanks.
number, so.
Okay.
I could, if you want me to bring it back, I'll do what I can, okay?
Back to the previous slide for a second. You noted that there aren't very many good recharge sites in the valley, but it seems like half the recharge is coming out of seepage from canals.
Mm-hmm. And it's going into the shallow, unconfined system.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I'm speaking, I'm talking about the principal act for the Logan.
Okay.
Now, all the municipalities usually pull water out of the principal aquifer, and so the recharge to that system is more critical than the recharge to the shallow unconfined. When it comes to culinary supplies, and this is kind of what this study was looking at. But that recharge to the shallow unconfined would move to, Swift Slough, Hopkins Slough, all those sloughs that exit the valley. So there is an amount of water that does move through the valley fairly quickly and exits. Okay, that's the way I would explain that, I guess. This is kind of going back, but in 2007, the county did hire Evan Olson, who used to be a state representative, and he went around and talked to the communities and the irrigation companies and came back to the county and made a recommendation, and he recommended that they create a water conservancy district. But they wouldn't do that because they wouldn't be voted in the next time. And so instead of a conservancy district, he said, well, then you have to do something that answers these three questions that the citizens wanted. They wanted a local water authority. They want somebody to manage the water for them. They don't want to lose, well, anyway, the citizens want the water authority to be accountable to the public, meaning that no board appointed to be there for many years. They wanted to be elected. And the citizens wanted action to protect the barrier of development allocation. And so that's why, in this process, that's why they hired a water manager, was to fulfill these needs, because they really didn't want to create a conservancy district. So,
The big difference is if you had a conservancy district?
the biggest opposition to having a conservancy district by the people in Cache County was the fact that the conservancy district board was not elected, and they didn't want a board making decisions about water in Cache County that were not accountable to the people who would elect them. And so,
is that true? Is that true for all conservancy district boards by law?
They're appointed boards, and so they have an appointment for a certain number of years, and I think the reason they do is because they're planning water 40 years in the future, and when you say, well, we're going to invest $23 million in this project, then they really can't get voted out. They just say they're doing it, they have the ability to tax. That's how they've got their budget worked out, and they're going to do it. If a county council said we're going to spend this much money, or we're going to collect this much tax, then they may not be voted in next time. And so the electorate kind of controls them a little bit more than on the conservancy district. I don't know, does that answer your question?
Well, and they have the right to tax.
Yeah, they can tax.
So it's an unelected taxing entity that you're creating.
So anyway, in that process, we went through and we have mapped all the water companies in Cache County. And depending on the acreage you're looking at, it looks like a lot of the DT is from irrigation. But anyway, these are all of the irrigation companies in the county. And again, this is the total land change is about 9,700 acres since 2000. Not that all of that came out of irrigation. But the county has gone through and for each irrigation company listed the water rights. And then this little figure down here represents all of the parcels that the county has record that something was built on. And so the county has gone through every one of those parcels and looked to see if there was, well, when they were built, because the groundwater management plan was September of 1999. So everything since 2000, that's a parcel that's had something built on it. We've gone out and traced what's been built and taken that out of production. if it was on irrigated ag, so that we know how much is coming out of ag production. This is an example of, you can't read this down in the corner too good because of whatever that is, but this is an example of that basically on the upper canal. The red line's the upper canal, the yellow line is the Logan Northern, and we've gone through and taken those acres out of production and done that by different years. And there's about 402 acres out of production since 2000, just in this one area. That means that if you have a parcel that was a 20-acre parcel, and the county had someone want to build a building on that, and the building took up an acre, and the driveway took up a half an acre, then we went through and took that out and said that's no longer being used as irrigated ag.
The lot would be?
Nothing happened to the rest of the lot, so we're assuming that it stayed the same.
And so if it went from being a field or an orchard to a subdivision that has the same water rights, so when you buy a lot of land and it's got water rights associated with it, is that still considered irrigated ag? Understand what my question is?
Well, as far as the shareholder in the company, if this is an irrigation company, it would be, he would still have his rights to use water, and so the right didn't go away. But there's not a good way to move the water from irrigated ag to municipal. So I worked at the state engineer's office for 29 years. I never saw a change application come in on any of this water. And you lose the water right from non-use, or have the potential to lose it after 7 years now. It used to be 5. And so it's important that Cache County keep track of this water so that we know how much is coming out of production, so we can start to make these changes at some point in time.
But my question is it out of production? I mean, is that water not being used anymore, or is it being used for irrigating lawns and gardens
Part of
versus?
it would be used. So, you know, if you put in a subdivision and you have, well, it's already mapped. If you put in a subdivision, so here's a pink subdivision, okay? And I can't see the legend, but it probably came out of production since 2000. So you go through that process and map out each one of those houses, but you don't map out the lawn. So the water could still be used on the lawn, but there's still a lot of land that it's not being used on. And the water rights based on beneficial use. So, you know, you might have a flow, but the most important part of the right is the beneficial use, and that's the number of acres you irrigate. And that's how you get your diversion and depletion allocation from the state engineer. So these are the purposes of water banking. And this comes out of the Western States Water Council publication. It's not I didn't dream it up, I just took it from them. It's to create a reliable water supply during dry years, ensure the future water supply for people, farms, and fish, which they weren't there before, but anyway. It acts as a market mechanism, and it's something that I think we need in Cache County. Jody Williams is an attorney for Utah Power and Light, has been for a long time, and works for them on contract now. She said we're shifting from allocation to reallocation of water resources in Utah, and most states have sanctioned banks to allow that to occur. State engineer has a toolbox that he can use, and he can do stream alterations, well drilling, everything under the law, but there's no sanctioning in the state of Utah for banking. At least there wasn't in 2008, there is some now. But there's no way for him to reappropriate water, and that's really what I think you're talking about. How do you get into this process of managing the change from what it was to what you want it to be? And the biggest and most important part of that is compensation. You know, one of the most interesting graphs that I've seen in all the research that I've looked at, and you can correct me if I've got the axis wrong or whatever, is that there was one kind of like this. And it went like this, and I think this was wild. and I'm not sure if this was water and sediment, but anyway, it's like this. And every stream falls somewhere, probably off that line. Okay? And the idea is that if you have too much water and not enough sediment, you can move it one way or the other. But the bottom line in all this is cost. You know, if you're going to move it to the line here, and that's what you decide you want because you're a water manager and the people in Cache County want to go there, then what's the cost to society to do that? You know, there's the option, you know, to either get more water or take water out and take sediment out. But there's a cost to every one of those options. I don't know, you know, I think it's a good graph. I don't know that that's the exact Wild River. But bottom line is, I think it's a representation of evaluating a system and deciding what you want. And based on what it's going to cost society and what society is willing to pay, you'll move to whatever point you want to on the line. And if society wants more water out of that river, but they want to hit the line and they want to have a stable system and they want it to operate the way it ought to operate, there's a cost. But anyway, that's part of reappropriation, I think. Okay. So we went to the legislative task force with a bill to create banking, and I'm not going to go into it in depth. We succeeded with the legislative task force. They passed it out, but there was some opposition when it got to the floor, and there have been some movements for water banks. Burl Enterprise area that's got a huge drawdown in their system and has subsidence in that valley, et cetera. They picked up on the ideas, and they've got basically everything that was in the original law that we proposed to the legislature for that system down there. And it has some caveats in the law to it, et cetera. But anyway, I was glad that that law passed. It went interim. We didn't study it a lot because Senator Stoll has got 2 bills that talk about banking this year, and so we decided to see how that went. And this is the definition of a water bank. And the bottom line is you have to have sanctioning, and the bank acts as a facilitator. In Cache County, it would be a willing seller, willing buyer type of a bank. If you had a water right that you weren't using, or you're a canal company or whatever, you would come in. You could deposit that in the bank under Stoll bills. You create a special district, which is not a conservancy district, then you can hold those without forfeiture to be managed within that system for the needs of the people in that system in the future. So anyway, banking, it's sanctioned, but not exactly the way I'd like to see it, but we can get there.
Change the right from an ag right to a municipal right to protect you from forfeiture.
Under House Bill 51, if a state acquired a share in a company prior to that being passed, then it can be held in its current status. In other words, if I'm Logan City and I have 100 shares in this company and my future plan says I'm going to need that, then it can be held that way. After that date when it was passed, if I acquire shares in the company and I don't get a change application approved on it, it's subject to forfeiture. Does that answer your question? So since the passage of House Bill 51, if they don't get a change approved on it, it's not protected.
So prior to 51, if you've got an ag right held by a municipality and they need it for their future, is that future ag development or future municipal culinary water development?
Well, it's just held right now, but if they want to use it for municipal, they have to file the changes. But they're not going to lose it just by holding it in ag still. That doesn't mean the company would lose it maybe, but if they ever want to use it for municipal, they have to file the change. It's just that they can keep it for future need.
But if the company can lose it,
and the company you can assign the loss to the municipality.
So in essence, they could lose it if they don't do something with it. They can't just sit on it, correct?
I think that would be a court battle. I think they say they can because of the legislature's bill. Hold that for reasonable future need. And the canal company, if you were ever re-adjudicated, you might have to go to court to see who lost some water rights. Okay.
The biggest lawyer wins.
Yeah, kind of.
Do you have a sense of how many of these change rights are hanging out there that haven't been filed on that should have been? Meaning that went from ag to municipal, but people never filed the change.
We could generate those numbers, but we haven't. Okay, I just gave you an example of what's gone on canal. But in the law, you have to not use it for 7 years now. Plus, there's a little caveat that says if you've diverted, it says if you've used substantially all of the water, then it's like using all. Okay, and so there are some caveats in the law. And like I say, I don't know what would happen for sure. But I think a municipality would say we've held that for reasonable future growth, and you cannot eliminate that right. So anyway, it's something you need to work with.
When
Municipalities on.
When I've told this story, because I've heard about this at the Northern Utah Water Conference a couple of years ago, the question I've been getting is, where has the water been going? Let's say there's a significant fraction of irrigation company water that's in ag use officially, but we know it's not in ag use in reality. Is the water pouring out the end of the system if there's less water being used, or
Times of the year there's excess water, and so what you're seeing, I think, in Cache County, I think as you see this change occur, you're seeing a rewatering of the streams to some degree. It might not be the stream they diverted out of, but it will eventually make it to the next stream that they're filling into. And so the canal companies used to have to divert 122nd feet, and people were always needing water, and now they don't have to divert that much, and the people aren't always needing water. So what it means is you're not using it all, probably, and so it's rewatering a stream or a slough or something.
are there users that have been able to accelerate their use of water in the system that used to get cut off more often? Because there's more water available?
Well, you've got, I don't know if this answers that question directly, but I think you've gone from flood irrigation to sprinkle and those kinds of things, and so you've been able to manage the water that you've taken into the system a little bit more efficiently. But you still have a lot of loss, and you still have a lot of water that's not diverted now because they haven't maintained their systems to be able to divert. So they just have taken the lumps, and they've decided that it's not worth the money. Go ahead and try to take all that water. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Well, keep going. I know you got other things you want to talk about.
But Idaho has not yet fought delivering it across the state line, have they?
I don't think they ever will fight it.
So they're still delivering it?
Yeah.
Across state line?
They're still delivering.
Even though they have the ability not to?
Well, you have an accounting model that says that you need to deliver it. And I don't think they'd ever go to court and say, we don't have to deliver that water. I'm not sure what would happen there. But if we're not using it in Utah, then they don't have to deliver it. And that's the big issue, because you don't want to lose an 1860 priority water right. You know, like say the canal water right now, say that they don't do any kind of a resolution and that water right isn't diverted, you know, to its potential, then you have a 122nd foot water right that isn't being diverted, and they haven't for the last 2 years probably diverted all the water they could have, so some of it's gone downstream to meet the downstream right on Bear River. That means Idaho hasn't had to send quite as much water across the state line. So it's either held in Bear Lake or they've used it up there, because we've been giving that increment to Bear River Canal Company out of Cache County.
So they actually have delivered that.
Yeah, they actually have.
It's a responsive enough system to keep track of that and keep control.
And I think if you did a double mass diagram on say the Logan River versus the Bear River at state line, you would see that curved and that they've been delivering less water over the last 15 years.
Could you just remind me the sort of the ratio between the amount of water coming across the state line versus the runoff of the Logan River?
The amount of water?
Yeah, 2-to-1 ratio, 3-to-1. What's the ratio of how much more is a total mean annual flow of the Bear River at the state line versus what comes out of the Logan River? 5 times more, 2 times more, that's just sort of a simple number we ought to know.
We ought to know, or I ought to know?
No. Well, I mean.
That's hard to say because about 60% of, I think it's 60% of the water comes in a cash valve. So the water, that comes across the state line is not. If you totaled all of the streams in Cache Valley,
yeah,
you're talking about a 50-50 split.
Oh, okay.
Cache Valley.
That's what it was, 50-50. Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
If you include streams in Idaho, it might go 60-40 or something, but it's rough, I'd say.
Yeah, no, that helps. That's great.
Okay. Water planning, run out of time, so anyway. Anybody know who built this dam? This is called Wheelon Dam. Anybody know who built this?
Mr. Wheelon?
No.
It was Telluride Power.
Telluride Power did it, and it was Scottish investors that were putting money into it, but it was kind of like a private, I guess, effort to water Boxelder County. And the engineer was Elwood Mead. The contractor was a guy named Garland, and the financier was a guy named Bachman. Okay? So before Elwood Mead got into the federal government, he was trying to put together projects on the slide, I don't know, on the side.
Well, wasn't this this was one of the largest rivers developed privately before the Reclamation Service would. Yeah, in Donald Worster's book, he talks about the Bear River as one of the biggest projects in the West that was done without federal government involvement.
But in the course of this project, and you might learn more than I know about it, but my understanding is that they went ahead and built Wheelon, and for a long time they diverted out of the west side. They started this in about 1883, and I think your best right, Dan, is 1889, right, on the west side. So they must have finished it about 1889 when you and I took it over. But this is another picture and another picture, and you can see eventually in about 1904, was it? They put a canal on the east side. So this is the old Wheelon Dam, and downstream of the Wheelon Dam, in about 1927, Utah Power and Light came in and built what they call Cutler Reservoir. Wheelon Dam is upstream of this and was inundated when this was put in. So anyway, just a little bit of history. This is a report by Elwood Mead that came out in 1903, and it's interesting to me that in 1903 is when Utah created its law for, prior appropriation and appropriating. Anyway, you might want to read the whole thing, but water commissioners were appointed, and water was started to be distributed. This is a bill that was Senate Bill 99 that was brought up last year, and it has to do with change applications. I'd like to point out that even though many people would say we don't have an area of origin clause in our law, we do. And I think area of origin is based on the fact that a long time ago people did divert water into the canals, their neighborhood canals, and eventually they had to become mutual irrigation companies. But there is the ability to keep that water in that area, okay? And there's an area of origin part of the Bear Development Act. But this law was basically saying that if you have owned a share in a company, that you owned it separately from the canal company, and that you could file a change application on that, which kind of takes that area of origin out of it. There is a big debate in the legislature, not really on the floor, but between legislative individuals in the Water Rights Task Force, et cetera, about whether or not a shareholder owns the water or the company owns the water. And from my philosophical point of view is if you give the water to the shareholder, then you have no company and you lose area of origin, because that means that a conservancy district with a lot of money can go buy water anywhere, put it in their portfolio, and eventually file a change to move it out of where it is to where they want it. So anyway, this bill didn't succeed last year, but people may even this legislative session bring something like it forward. But I think it will have huge impacts on the areas where water is currently being used.
Can you just restate, the bill will allow people
It basically would change the concept that the water right now the concept is the water belongs to the irrigation company.
So this will move more clearly to authorizing individual shareholders to
own it and file a change and not have the irrigation company be able to say anything about it. Okay? That has a huge impact on irrigators. Okay? And I really just, I mean, if you're, the only thing that makes you a mutual irrigation company is all your shareholders agree that you're going to provide and use it.
manage the
Yeah, you're going to manage the system. Take that away from the irrigation company. If the president can't make a decision, then what's the use of being one?
Is there cases then where they could actually move to a different irrigation company? Like if the shareholder actually owns the water right?
Yeah, there are
instances or something.
In Cache County. Hyde Park bought shares in Logan Northwest Field. They moved those to the Upper Canal to be delivered to Smithfield so they could take water in their system. And so, yeah, here locally, but it had to be under the direction of the company, not the direction of the individual shareholder. Okay, so you have to have a lot of agreement to do it. If this bill passes, you don't have to have much. In fact, none. Okay.
And what legislator is pushing this?
Well,
somebody. So I mean,
John
is this being pushed by Salt Lake County or Wasatch Front?
I don't know. This is being recorded, right?
Is this an urban entity or a rural entity who's pushing this?
These are entities who control a lot of water and want to control more water. Is that fair to say?
That's spot on. Just
okay. I don't think Senator Valentine knew what he was getting into when he agreed to do this based on discussions out there. But anyway,
So a couple of years ago, there was all this press locally in Providence buying up water from up in my neck of the woods near Richmond. Mm-hmm. And that was individuals negotiating with the city of Providence, right, who were shareholders in the irrigation company.
Yeah, that was water that had a water right, and in the hearing, the individual who was using the right said he'd used it without incident for more than 10 years. He'd never been short. He'd always used the whole supply. And because he had used it, the beneficial use was in use. Mm-hmm. The state engineer said, well, if you move the water from here to Providence, it does not impact our district on the Bear River. It doesn't take any more water out of Bear Lake. It doesn't make any more deliveries from any other user. So it doesn't matter. You can go ahead and do that.
But within the irrigation company that person's right had been part of.
He's not part of an irrigation company.
Okay, so just
his own personal water right.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay. So the irrigation company really didn't have a say in it. Mm-hmm. So if a shareholder it was his own water right, then the shareholder could do just like that. Right now he can't. Okay. This is legislation that's before the legislature right now. Lost share certificates is kind of okay. If you lose a share, it's a way to get your share certificate back. Notice goes out to let everybody know you want that share certificate. Anyway, it will pass the task force and go through. I don't know. Do you want me to go through these? But down here, the important part of this is these at the bottom. Change applications, shareholder changes was brought up last year, so I just talked about. These are critical issues that do not have any bills sponsored to modify them right The rest of these are pretty, everybody agrees they ought to happen pretty much, okay? But every once in a while, somebody will throw one of these in, and it will be interesting to see what happens in this legislative session, to see how it turns out.
What's the debate over the forfeiture?
This.
The last one in the list.
All right. Oh. Trying to think of, can you understand what I know it's an issue. I think it's just whether or not the state engineer has the ability to forfeit a water right. It's part of the change application process. He used to have the ability not to actually forfeit the right, but to say you hadn't used it because you hadn't used it by effective law, you lost it. Mm-hmm. So he could give you a haircut on the water right, and if he did, then you effectively lost that portion of the right. I think that's kind of what the debate is whether or not that ought to be in the change application process or not.
You talking about current legislation on water right forfeiture?
Now this may come up.
Okay, because there's something about notice and priority dates. I forget which one it is.
And that's probably the water rights amendments.
Could be in there, yeah.
In that part of it, there's some references that are incorrect that they're just fixing. So I don't think that it's legislation that will really impact management of water in Cache County. There is another bill that went away from that. But if you look at water development in the future, a little while back, we had Water Resources come and talk to us about a pipeline for the Washakie project. I don't have a pointer, so you're just going to have to see by yourself where you think Washakie is. It's kind of up there along I-15. To bring water down to the Slaterville diversion, which is past Willard Bay, down into Weaver Davis area. And Cache County really wasn't a part of that. When I came to Cache County and said, well, this really doesn't affect you, I don't know. Okay? So they let us know they were doing it. And this is the Bear River Development Act water. They're taking $50,000 for Weaver Basin, Jordan Valley each down to the Wasatch Front. Box Elder County gets $60,000, Cache County gets $60,000. In the Bear River Development Act, Water Resources has filings. They don't really have a water right. Their applications to appropriate it were filed by the Bureau and have been turned over to the Board of Water Resources. Basically, these are the findings of what's going on in the system as they created the Bear River Development Act. Point out that A on there says where the water originates. So they looked at all of this. A lot of people say there's no area of origin in the law in the state of Utah, but when they created this act, based on where the water originates, Cache County, Box Elder got a little bit better divvy out of the allocation. So it is in the law. Other thing I'd point out is under 3A, it does not cover groundwater. And when they first initiated this, they were going to use Cache Valley's groundwater to meet part of the Bear River Development Act demands. And basically, Cache County said, no, you can't. And they're not going to now. Okay? So I think those are important things to look at in the Bear River Development Act. And developed water means surface water developed by projects authorized under this chapter. Basically, one of the reasons that I was hired as a water manager is because these pre-construction costs that they talk about, they're starting to develop engineering concepts for development of the Bear River and taking water to St. George through the Lake Powell pipeline. So money was going to come into the system from the legislature. They said we want to study the Bear River as well as the Lake Powell pipeline. And so that's one reason, probably the main reason that they hired a water manager in the Cache Valley. Again, it says that they'll develop the surface waters of the Bear River and its tributaries, list some of the dams that they might look at. And I think this is important. Number 4, the purchase of real property does not constitute water development. And so basically they were telling those who are going to develop water in the future that you can't buy water to put it in the pipeline. You have to develop water to put it in the pipeline, which is, I think, good for area boards, because that's basically saying you can't go buy their water rights and ship them out. And the water goes to those conservancy districts in Cache County, like I've mentioned. 220,000 acre feet. And in this process, water resources, when we started talking about, well, how's Cache County going to get their water, et cetera, they always say, well, you just take it by exchange. And so in this last year, we basically said, how do you take it? How are we going to exchange it? So in this concept report that they're going to come out with on this pipeline from Boxelder County to the Wasatch Front, they do include now how the water will be exchanged into Cache Valley. Basically, either take it out before it goes down into Wasatch, or you pump it back into Cutler. And you have pipelines to distribute the water out of Cutler Reservoir to all of the low-lying irrigation companies like Benson Irrigation Company, Wellsville, Eastveld. Anyway, the ones that are along. And then you use the water that's higher in the watershed for culinary use. Kind of basic way to look at it. This is a picture of, anybody know? Newton Dam. Okay, Newton Dam, the first one went in 1871. I think it was the first dam. This is they actually enlarged it in 1927. That's what this is a picture of. And as I talk to you, I think I've already covered this subject, so we'll just go through it. We are in the process of developing a master plan for the county. Number 11, no matter what we do, we have to look at the environmental issues of each alternative. And so we're looking at how's the best way for Cache Valley to develop its water. We have groundwater resources, we have fair development water, we have water that's in ag use right now. As you make those changes, what will it cost, and how will you pay for it, and how will you make sure that all of the varied interests of all the different people are met in that process. So anyway, that's about what, oh, I even have a whole other canal restoration. I can quit now or go on. Okay. On this canal restoration, it's through Emergency Watershed Protection Program, basically for natural disasters. And they did find that it was a natural disaster. There was a landslide that took the canal out. This is a picture of the island area. I'm not so sure this isn't a picture of the canal and, in the bottom part of here, and the old road that used to go up. Be right about where the canal did fell because of the landslide. This is we took Cache County Council on a bus tour to show them the area. The kind of orange colored area is the area that's irrigated under the upper canal. The blue area is the middle canal. And there's been quite a bit of discussion about how many acres can the middle canal water. But all of these acres, excluding, well, I shouldn't say excluding, none of the middle canal water can actually go on the upper canal land. But by exchange, a lot of different people use it. But the blue area is their acres, and my thinking is that if you went back to the Kimball Decree, it'd be about 3,300 acres. But when the state engineer came through and re-adjudicated it, he said that you could use it on 7,000, which would include the yellow and the red and probably some land we don't have here. But anyway, the water's a good water right. It's one that Cache County ought to maintain, again, for its current use or to change it in the future as needed.
3,000, 7,000 numbers. That is including an awful lot of this land that you talked about earlier as having been converted to clear urban uses in some cases.
Right. Some of it would be included in that. Okay.
Do we have good numbers on how much that's actually in agricultural production? I know it's a hot potato and we're being recorded.
I think we could come up with the numbers.
Yeah.
Okay, and for specific instances, we would.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. This is just a picture of the canal. And I guess this is the upper canal, one of the alternatives that they could go to bring water down. You can see this bar on the side. I think originally the upper canal actually had a wooden flume that took it around this corner, and they went in later and built a concrete wall to do that. These are kind of a list of the water rights. The Logan Northern River. This is for the Logan High Park and Smithville Canal. That's the upper canal. They total 122 second feet. And when the river's flowing 400 second feet, let's see. Can't read that underneath there. Can you read that? 116. So if it's at 400, Logan High Park Smithville can take 116. If it's at 100, they can take 20 based on the Kimball decree and how the water is distributed on the river. Just out of curiosity, does anybody know why they have an October 1st and October 10th, right? It's the history question. They used to have to dig sugar beets. They used to have to water them so they could do that. These are the Logan and Northern Canal Company rights, very similar. They total 113 instead of 122 or so, and kind of the same information there. These are some of the alternatives that have kind of changed in color now, but this alternative would bring water out in the upper canal, a 6x6 culvert down to the golf course, then put it in a pipeline and take it down the highway to the Logan Northern Canal. This is what they call Lundstrom Park, or the 1500 North alternative. Bring it down the canyon, a 6x6 culvert, takes it in the existing canal, and then down to the Logan Northern Canal. This is alternative 3. Alternative, and it's the build-in-place alternative now. However, they're studying other options in that corridor. And this is what you call the canal preferred alternative. They would like to see it go all the way to 3100 north and bring the water back. In any of these alternatives, they will rewater the lower canal from the Logan Island diversion, or the Logan Temple diversion, which is on about 4th North. Let's see, am I saying that right? 4th North and about 7th East. Anyway, where the deadway comes up. They bring water back to that point and then let it flow down the canal. I don't know, do you have any questions about those alternatives? Okay. They've basically taken out the first alternative. So it's 3 alternatives now, but anyway. This is the approximate cost of the work, and it's 75-25 split. It turns out a little bit differently because these numbers have the TA and the FA agreement built into them. The TA agreement is 100% NRCS. Just another old picture of what the power plant used to look like. We signed the TA and FA agreements in April of 2010. They're extended to May of 2011 right now. We did have to release some money back to NRCS for additional EIS studies. This is what's covered in the EIS. Probably all be familiar with that. They're basically saying that instead of the draft EIS being out in the winter of 2010, it'll be out in March of 2011. It changes a lot of the dates through there, but they're still thinking that they'll be able to meet this fall of 2012 deadline. These are change applications that have been filed by really both of the canal companies. They filed them to be able to include lands even above the canal, in the current areas of the canal, and to make sure that they can include all of Smithfield, the northwest of Smithfield, and the North Bench. The water has been used on those areas in the past, but had not necessarily been included. So that's what the changes include. Right now, Logan Northern exchanges Hyde Park gets a good amount of their culinary water by exchange out of these canals. They have a half-second foot right in Logan Northern for their first half-a-second foot that comes out of Birch Creek. North Bench Ditch has 18 second feet that they exchange out of this canal to Smithfield Irrigation Company. And Logan City has an exchange for 20 second feet that they take out of the Witt Springs.
Can you just quickly explain how the exchanges work? So Logan City is drawing water out of DeWitt Springs.
They have a right for 10 second feet. Normally they draw somewhere around 28 second feet, and sometimes more like, well, I don't know what their peak is or what their max a lot of the water they take out is based on this exchange and an exchange they have with the Logan Hyde Park and Smithville irrigation.
So they're putting water back in down at DeWitt Springs or back into the canal. And
what happens is Logan City takes all of the water, distributes it for culinary use, and then they have the exchange agreement says that they'll pay them $4 an acre foot for that water that they take. And if they ever have to pump water back out of their wells, they'll pump it back at $4 an acre foot.
So the principle is, since the water at DeWitt Springs would have naturally gone into the Logan River and been part of the Logan River's base flow, instead Logan directly pumps it out of the ground because it's pure water.
Oh, no, instead DeWitt runs in. They had a right for 10. They needed more right. So they went to the canal companies and said, we'd like to be able to take some of your water at DeWitt Springs. So the canal companies worked an exchange agreement out with them and said, you can take some of our water, take it down your pipeline and store it in your reservoirs for culinary supply. And when you take that, we'll sell it to you for $4 an acre foot. Okay? So so if there are times that the river is way low, like in 77, and the canals need water, and the municipality's not using its groundwater for use in the city, then they've agreed that they would pump that water out of those wells. They're kind of strategically located close to different canal companies, and pump that at $4 an acre foot. Even though it costs them more, they'll pump it at $4 an acre foot.
And the computation for the river is the USGS gauge plus the USGS gauge on the Logan Hyde Park and Smithfield Canal. The sum of those two defines natural conditions that then are allocated. Right. Is that sort of how that works?
Right.
Right.
But that wouldn't count for the stuff that the city takes out at the springs, right?
Right. Yeah. So that must be separately gauged.
That's separately gauged.
Got it. Okay.
The city gauges that.
I don't think the USGS adds that in.
Yeah.
To the Logan River flow. I don't think they ever.
No. Yeah. I don't. Yeah. No, they don't. Because they do publish a first dam plus canal. Yeah, and it doesn't include the woods. Yeah. Okay.
This is interesting. Smithville, because Smithville gets all their water out of the canyon by an exchange with the upper canal. They take it
out of Logan Canyon?
No, out of Smithville Canyon. What they do is they take 5 second feet out of springs in Smithville Canyon and exchange 5 second feet of water they have shares for in the upper canal into that Summit Creek or wherever Smithfield Irrigation Company needs it, depending on where they can supply it. So they supply this Logan River water in exchange to take spring water up their canyon.
How did they identify the acreage that the canal companies were going to dry up with this exchange?
Good question.
Okay.
It's one of those things I don't know that they have. But I think if you went back and re-looked, that there's been enough land taken out of production to meet the exchanges.
It'd be good to identify that, especially if you want to create a water bank.
If you want to keep doing it forward.
Yeah.
Okay. And this North Logan's development of Green Canyon does not count?
Does not count?
There's no exchange?
There's no exchange.
I mean, Green Canyon would have naturally flowed in just like any of the other creeks.
It wouldn't have gone into the Logan River probably until it went further west, though. I don't know where it would have actually gone into the Logan River. I know there used to be a flume across the canal that used to carry excess water across the canal, and when they built some subdivisions, somebody removed that. So it didn't. I don't know where it actually went into the Logan River. You know, and I think you would start accounting on this banking from September of 1999, because everything prior to that was already being done. You understand what I'm saying there? That if you started the bank from September 1999 forward, basically when the bear was distributed, when these were when the bank would go into effect, and everything would be status quo. Does that make sense to you? Whatever was happening was happening. And so I think it's important to start the bank at that date forward. Okay. Oh, these are just some global comparisons that I ran. You can debate them if you want. You know, if Washakie is going to be a bit, and I think this is way underestimated. Okay, but if it's going to be that much money, I think that's out now. So anyway, and the delivery is about 140,000 acre feet. Then it's going to cost you $7,000 an acre foot. To put this canal back is going to cost about $214 per acre foot locally. I'm not discounting the fact that you've paid your taxes to the federal government. They're paying 75% of it. But bottom line is it's about $214 an acre foot. Because if you look at what the state engineer adjudicated it to, it's to 7,000 acres. Okay, and 4 times 7 is 28. So, you know, anyway, that's some rough comparisons. So that's all I had. But I guess I would really like to point out, in this process of getting banking established in the state, it is established under special district law now, not under water rights law, but under special district law. And it's taken some time to get it done. And Cache County can't bank until it goes through whatever it has to bank. And so whatever this science group does to study the management of water from how it is now to the future, it's got to look at, you know, those kinds of graphs that we looked at, you know, water and sediment and all that, and cost, and somehow you got to get a legislative body to sanction it. If it's not sanctioned, it doesn't go anywhere, I found out.
Yes and no, I think it strikes me as your office moves forward.
Right.
Whether for the readers certifies it.
I think one of the good parts about water banking is if it's a locally controlled bank, willing seller, willing buyer, those kinds of things, that everyone will have an opportunity to go purchase from the bank. You know, it brings water from early dated water rights back into the market system, so that if you decide you want to use water for more municipal use, you know, then the mechanism will drive it that way. If you want to use water for the environment, it will drive it that way.
But from a science point of view, that's one of the including all of those reflect natural elements. Maybe unforeseen consequences.
Yeah. Yeah, and law changes make those happen. You know.
Yeah.
Of the ditches in Cache County, how how accurate are the flows in the ditches? Logan Hyde Park and Smithfield is obviously the best GS gauge. What about the other ditches?
That's getting better and better.
Who does them?
Well, I'm trying to explain this. In all of the systems where there is a commissioner, like there is a distribution system. So on the Little Bear, on the Logan, on Summit Creek, not the Blacksmith Fork, but most of the main tributaries have a commissioner on them. And that commissioner keeps very good records of who diverts and how much they divert. Okay. In more recent times, it's easier to do that remotely. Okay. River Canal Company and others went down and saw what they're doing on the Sevier River with remote sensing and remote operation of gates, etc. And because of that, they started to remotely sense what was occurring in Rich County. Rich County picked up on it in that distribution system. So you can go to a site called bearriverbasin.org and pull up most of the large diverters on the river now and see what they're taking. And it's pretty good gauge data. I mean, people on the river are trusting it. You know, and so in Cache County, you would find that on the Logan River and starting to occur on other rivers throughout the valley, but not
at the points of diversion.
Right.
Two vignettes in the study that I talked about on the Cub River that I had done. We worked there because basically at that time it was completely non-contentious, so we were harmless. And so they actually let us gauge and establish our own rating relations. And the lower canal, we came back and said, you know, you're like taking twice as much water as your right is. And we would go to press, and the guy said, yep, you bet. Yep, nobody cares. And I mean, they weren't even the slightest bit intimidated. I mean, it was like, you bet we are. And, we do it because nobody cares. And so, it is, as Doug mentioned, I mean, for what we're doing, it's absolutely essential that we work on real amounts and not paper amounts. Mm-hmm. Because the numbers can be wildly different. And then just the other vignette is a decade or more ago, I was really involved in a big contentious thing up on the Flathead Indian Irrigation Project in Montana. And the reality was the rating relations that were used to calculate discharges were horrendous. I mean, those rating relations weren't maintained for decades. The staff gauges weren't even functioning. The staff recorders didn't even go up and down. And it was all completely fictitious numbers. And so, but it's what could be more controversial than a bunch of academic pinheads suddenly going into canals and figuring out what the numbers are. So if we were to think about doing that, we would have to do an awful lot of damage. We would do an awful lot of damage control. And maybe the water lab has that crate, it would be non-threatening, but we'd have to find the right entity amongst us so that we didn't have a bunch of students shot when they were in irrigation ditches taking.
Actually, Jack, Steve Barkfus at the lab has been doing that for the last 4 or 5 years. They've looked at, I think it's on the order of 300 to 600 different gauges around the state, and they're finding the same thing. They're wildly off.
Yeah. No, so it's a big, but it's also, we would have to build a huge amount of trust with the water users before, to begin to do that, but it would probably be hugely important.
I agree.
I think it's getting a lot better on the Bear River system. I think if you compared systems here with systems throughout the state, you're going to find that we're a little bit better off.
Great.
Okay. And I think we'll get better and better. I think as we find those kinds of concerns and problems, we manage those so that they're not there anymore in the future.
You can say yes on this if you want.
Bob, could you talk about, you mentioned a bunch of the exchanges with the various canal companies and cities have, which to me seem like a very innovative way of banking already. What's the difference between those existing exchanges and what you're talking about in terms of a water bank?
What Jack just said. With the water bank, you know right up front what's being exchanged. With those old exchanges, you don't. You know, so everything's metered. The records are kept more appropriately to people who are interested. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a lot of old things that kind of just happened. And so if you had the bank, if you really wanted to move 200 acre feet based on bank water to Nibley or somewhere else, there's a record of it every year, and you can go look at it, you can see exactly what happened, how much land's coming out, which lands are associated with the water that was withdrawn from a well or from a stream or whatever. So it has to do with records and how they're managed. And I think that's important from now into the future. Like I said to Dan, I don't think you go back in time and try to straighten everything out, because when they distributed the river in September, in about, well, they started doing it in the 80s. But as you came online with the management plan in Cache County, you came online with groundwater management issues up in Idaho, then you had kind of status quo, and whatever that is, you just want to monitor change. I don't think you can go back and fix everything. I think you just have to start now and monitor change.
Talking about the discrepancy in the amount of water that's there, I think as we progress in the future, and water gets tighter and higher demand, you start to find those old leaks and misrepresented gauges.
Yeah, we have no choice but to.
Oh, yeah.
The numbers here.
I mean, one of the things that Rob.
The difference in the amount of water, I mean, it didn't make a lot of sense to regulate Cache County when the difference in calculation between Idaho's model and Utah's model was 40,000 acre feet. I mean, we only take 28.
Yeah.
You know, if they're not closer to 40,000, why are you worrying about 28?
I was going to say the piece of this that we don't have time to really resolve, but when I look at some of Rob's work up in Idaho, the changes that are being made in all this surface water management ended up having dramatic implications for the dynamics of the aquifer, which people who thought they understood the aquifer misjudge. And I'm curious to what extent the leakiness of our system explains the past performance of our aquifers and groundwater systems and future tightening of, if we really get good at accounting and good at using water and making sure we're not using it to recharge the aquifer, whether we have potential dynamics between those two systems that will become really significant.
And I think you have to set up a model so you can manage and see what the changes are.
Right.
That's what I'm saying. If there's that much in the mass balance and there's a huge reservoir of storage, you need to understand that.
Right.
And the more we're learning, the more we're understanding that the principal aquifer is different than the shallow and confined. And the principal one is the one that Cache County is the most interested in.
And the shallow is the one that gets recharged by all the
And
irrigation.
the shallow is the one that gets recharged by the irrigation.
And they're not connected, as far as we know.
Well, in Korea's study, they're I would say remotely connected. I mean, she talks about leaky system, and some of the studies that the university's done here, they basically say that no, it's not a leaky system. And they're pretty much separated.
Which one's providing the ecosystem services? Which aquifer? Is it the shallow one?
The shallow one you're talking about.
Right.
Yeah, stream flow, riparian areas.
Plus, you've got a lot of wells drilled into the principal aquifer that are just, a lot of times, just wasting water into that system.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be good to understand all of that process.
Yeah.
And maybe slow some of those off, depending on if you want to use surface water flows or groundwater flows for surface water. It wouldn't hurt to understand that system a little better.
Well, I officially decided that Bracken doesn't get any time today a while ago when I was